Today's lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about culture and communication. And while this is a vast topic, we're going to sort of hone in on some of the things that you are going to use for your assignments this week. So we're going to define what culture is. We're going to talk a little bit about co-cultures and how they influence your attitudes, beliefs, values. And then we're going to talk about some different cultural dimensions. And those cultural dimensions will be what you use to complete one of your larger assignments this week, and something that I'll talk you through a little bit because they can be kind of hard to understand sometimes in the textbook. So this will be a supplement to your chapter, but one I hope will further explain those different dimensions and give you some examples. All right, so let's dive in. So what do we mean when we are talking about culture? So this is pulled directly from your book, but it's the language, values, beliefs, traditions, and customs people share and learn. So a lot of times when we talk about culture, people automatically go to geographical region. And while we do develop a culture when we live in a specific geographical region, those are not the only cultures that we have. But if we think about the United States, for example, the United States has, if you take it as a broad kind of grouping, we do have some very specific cultural beliefs. Language, we typically speak English as our primary language. Values, we're going to talk about today. While this is ever changing as society changes, the United States, again, if we're looking at as a broad kind of country, so know that there are exceptions to every rule, but generally the United States is going to value things like independence. They're going to value things like status. That is very important. We're also a fairly materialistic country. Again, that's not everybody in the country, but the country as a whole. So those are some of the different values that we'll look at. Beliefs, traditions. So think about the 4th of July for an example. That is a very cultural tradition in the United States because that is our Independence Day. So these are the things that we are taught by our peer groups, by our family groups. They are often dependent on where we live. And so these cultural values, and this culture is sort of furthered through your interactions with those around you. And so they do grow and change as society grows and change, but they are something that we can generally see being held by a large group of people. Now, certainly, we don't want to take those at complete face value because stereotyping can occur, but they do give us a general sense of the beliefs, values, attitudes, those types of things in a particular culture. So we're talking about culture, we're looking at a very broad category. But within culture, you're going to belong to co-cultures. So any one person is going to have an infinite number of co-cultures that they are affiliated with. Co-cultures are excellent because they help us really form the sense of identity and can provide a lot of enrichment for our lives. So some of your co-culture examples. A great one would be age. So we'll take millennials as an example. If you are talking about millennial and you are an advertiser, you have very specific values, experiences that you are going to identify with that group based on their age. So that would be a great example of a co-culture. Another example of a co-culture we might look at is looking at religion. So maybe you are a member of a particular church or a particular religious organization. That would be an example of a co-culture. So that culture that you develop, you might belong to the United States culture, but that co-culture of that religious group also very heavily influences your thoughts, values, beliefs, attitudes. Another obvious one could be a co-culture of the South. So we interact and have very different sort of language and mannerisms if you live in the South than maybe if you live up north. So things like, I talked about this in a previous video, like bless your heart. That's a very Southern saying. So if you're not from this area, you might not understand the true meaning there. Also think about driving. That's another great example of culture and something we'll talk a little bit about in nonverbal communication. So it influences our nonverbal communication. Again, take it with a grain of salt, but in the South, typically, you will let people pass and you're pretty good about letting people into traffic. If you have ever driven on a major interstate in a northern city like New York, you best not do that because you will get run over. That is just not the norm in that particular culture. So they do influence how we believe, our attitudes, our beliefs, how we act, those types of things. Think about Nash Community College as a co-culture. We have very specific things that make up Nash Community College in this area. If you ever heard the term quote unquote blue love, that is something that's been developed at Nash. It really means serving sort of the whole student. So we offer a lot of services like student wellness, very intrusive advising, those types of things because of that culture of blue love. So that would be another example of a co-culture. So again, as an individual, you probably belong to quite a vast number of these. So when we're thinking about culture and co-cultures, we also want to think about how we utilize this information and how these sort of values, beliefs, attitudes shape the way in which we act towards one another, or we act within that culture. And that is defined through what we call cultural dimensions. This is something that you will work on in your cultural analysis for this class. So what we're going to do is talk through each of these cultural dimensions. I will try to define, they're on a spectrum, so kind of define either side for you. And as you're viewing this, think about what your particular culture embodies. So for the purposes of that cultural analysis, you are being asked to define a culture to which you belong. So you could choose something as broad as the United States, or you could choose something as narrowed down as the co-culture of maybe your family, or a particular religious organization, or maybe you belong to a particular club. So those would all be cultures for this assignment. So we're going to look at individualism versus collectivism, high and low context, uncertainty avoidance, power distance, talk and silence, and then I'm also going to define masculine and feminine as well, because that is an important one that you might be interested in evaluating for this. So let's first look at individualism versus collectivism. So this exists, again, on a continuum. So if we have individualism over here and then collectivism on the opposite side. So what this means is that cultures are largely either individualistic cultures or collectivist cultures. So a collectivist culture is where you do something for the good of the group. You are not prized for being kind of doing things for personal gain. Everything you do is for the good of the group. So you see these in a lot of, certainly Asian countries are very much considered collectivist cultures, and especially in their families too. So everything that is done for the good of that particular unit, not for the good of the individual. The United States is the vast opposite of that. We are a country that prides itself on being very individualist. We really try, if you've ever heard the expression like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and again, that is a very loaded example, but something that we hear perpetuated throughout our society. But it's this idea that an individual can rise up on their own through their own work. And that is just a very United States sort of value. We are a country that prides ourselves on promotions. We pride ourselves on sort of doing what we need to do to get to the top. And not necessarily caring about the good of the group. It is more for individual gain and achievement. So they both have pros and cons. One isn't necessarily good or bad, but they do exist, again, on a continuum. So think about for your culture, if you are primarily an individualist culture, so very much personal achievement is prioritized, or if it's more collectivist, where everybody contributes to the whole, and an individualist achievement is not something that you would get sort of praise for. So that's kind of a very brief overview of that individualist versus collectivist. All right, the next one we're going to look at is your high and low context. So this is all about how you communicate in a culture. If you've got low context culture, that means that you are very explicit with your language. So if you want somebody to do something, you explicitly tell them. If you are upset with someone, you explicitly tell them that. Low context cultures mean that language really is used to provide direction and to provide meaning. In high context culture, that means that those cultures rely more on context clues or nonverbals in order to show how they are feeling. So I will take an example of a good friend of mine. Her family is very much a high context culture. They would be sort of what you considered passive aggressive. You will never hear from them that they're upset, but you have to read through all the body cues and sort of how things are said to understand when someone in that family is upset, because they're not going to tell you. So that means you have to really pay attention to the context. They're a high context culture. My extended family, on the other hand, is a very low context culture. Conflict is very much something that happens in my extended family. if you offend someone, they will tell you how you offended them and why it offended them, and you will talk it out. So very much a low context culture. We don't leave a lot up to sort of interpretation. We're very upfront with sort of how we're feeling and what we'd like people to do about that. So those, again, two different sides of the spectrum. One's not better than the other. These are just kind of how we operate. All right, next we've got uncertainty, avoidance, and power distance. So if you think about uncertainty, some cultures don't mind uncertainty. They're totally okay with it. So things are very ambiguous. You might not see a lot of explicitly stated rules. Maybe sort of physical interactions are sort of uncertain, meaning that you don't have to stand in a line. You can just all mill about. There are no set rules for how you interact with other people. So if you are good with uncertainty, that might be your culture. Other cultures, things are very, very specced out. So meaning that there is a clear power distance. There is a clear hierarchy. India would be a great example of this. If you've ever heard of India's caste system, there is a clear social hierarchy. They don't leave a lot up to sort of chance. They know exactly where they stand based off of that social hierarchy. So that would be a great example of a culture that doesn't do very well with uncertainty. Also think about power distance. Power distance is how close you are to those in power. So for example, let's say if we took a religious organization, if your religious organization has low power distance, that culture, that means that you might be on a first name basis with everyone. You can walk up to your religious leader and have a conversation. You don't have to go through anyone. Let's take a different religious organization. So again, maybe if you attended a very large Catholic church would be a great example. There is a clear hierarchy of people kind of in that religious organization. So you would go through the channels in order to talk to someone who was maybe sort of the leader. You would definitely refer to titles, that type of thing. So that is the difference in power distance. If you don't have a lot of power distance, that means anybody can communicate with anyone. If your organization has very sort of segmented power distance, you refer with titles and you can't just jump right to the top, that means that you really you have a high power distance. So the distance between sort of the lowest person and the highest person in that organization. And that's a great thing that we look at with organizational communication, is how your particular organization functions. Okay. So talk and silence. You're going to read a great article on this, so I'm not going to go too far into this one. This will be part of your work for this week. But in some cultures, ours especially, silence is awkward. We do not like silence. We have to fill it. Other cultures, silence is considered very respectful. So instead of arguing or letting someone know that the conversation is finished, there will just be silence. And they're very okay with that silence. So that is very much a cultural dimension, how you handle the use of talk and silence. And again, you're going to get a great article that talks through this in your reading this week. All right. And then the last one I'm talking about that does not have a slide in here is masculine versus feminine cultural dimension. So this is one I want to go over because students typically see this and think, okay, if it is a culture primarily of females, then it's a feminine culture. If it's a culture primarily of males, it's a masculine culture. And I just kind of want to reiterate that your biological sex has nothing to do with where you fall in this cultural dimension. So feminine cultures are cultures that prioritize harmony. They are cultures that are a little more collectivist in their approach. They want to make sure that people feel included, that everyone's getting along. So there's a lot of emphasis on relationships. A masculine culture, on the other hand, very much is characterized by competition. There's a lot of conflict in masculine cultures. Sometimes aggression can be a hallmark of a masculine culture. So again, two different sides of the continuum. I'll use my own family as an example. I am one of 3 girls, and then my parents have a mother and father. So we are primarily females in our culture, but we are a very masculine culture. When we have disagreements, we are very competitive with one another. Being one of 3 siblings, you kind of have to fight it out, and we all, in our own little ways, compete with each other for maybe, like praise and and sort of status within our own family. So while we are a culture primarily of females, we are a very masculine culture. That's how we operate. So this idea of masculine versus feminine cultures. And again, in feminine cultures, a lot of prioritization on harmony and making sure that everyone is sort of seen and heard in that group. So after we kind of figure out what our cultural dimensions are, how can we increase our culture and communication knowledge, and what can we do with this information? So one way to further develop your cultural competence is to have a much greater increase of sort of contact with those who may be represented in cultures or co-cultures that are not the ones that you are sort of familiar with. It is 2020 at the time this is being filmed. And so there are so many ways to interact and learn about other cultures and their cultural preferences. You will learn quite a bit about this in your reading this week as well. And as our sort of globe continues to find new ways to communicate via technology, we will become a more and more global workforce. So this is very important as you transition into your working world. Tolerate ambiguity. So become okay with people who have different ideas, thoughts, but also sort of not knowing what is the right way to approach a situation. So be okay with multiple perspectives, something that we, again, really want to work on and can continue to hone in our personal practice. Be open-minded, again, learn about other cultures. If you ever have the opportunity to take a business trip, definitely you should be doing your research before you enter that culture. The article you will see this week is going to talk a lot about business practices in other cultures, and it's very different. So you want to make sure that you are culturally competent before you step into that room or before you jump on that Zoom meeting, so that you can show that you can certainly be someone who can interact in a wide variety of cultures and be an effective communicator. So these are all different cultural dimensions. Again, you will look at this more in depth this week in your assignment, but hopefully this has helped you sort of understand those cultural dimensions and given you a few examples.